Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. This is the continuation, Chapter 5 of Cryptological Aspects of VSP. This chapter here is fairly short, and so this shouldn't go too long. For this recording, I just pulled open Twitter's tweet deck, and that's essentially a listening and monitoring service for Twitter outside of their main Twitter platform at twitter.com. And in that, you can enter specific hashtags and then open up a column to see what's trending in terms of what people are talking about. And if you want to follow the news, you can do that. You can add columns for ABC, NBC, news, things like that, or your favorite bloggers, podcasters, and things like that. I just opened it up to give people some movement or something to sort of look at in terms of additional content. It's sort of adding a little bit more life to the video outside of the commentary if I'm reading too slow or people wander off mentally a little bit. And then of course I've included the notes on NSA ESP concerns and guidelines. I've read through this partially in a previous video for the person who's just maybe seeing this video for the first time. You guys can check out these documents in the CIA's CREST library, which is a declassified library for public consumption. And you should make note that these are actually classified as NSA documents through the CIA. Okay, so Chapter 5, Soviet Bloc Report Science on Parapsychology. One of the most critical aspects in the development of any new technology or field of science is the caliber of men working in the field. There are a fairly large number of Soviet scientists, see Appendix A and B, investigating various aspects of ESP. Some of these men are the leaders of less controversial fields of science. Perhaps a comparative study should be made based on past experience. In parentheses, the amount of high caliber effort focused on a particular problem in the past as related to the speed with which the particular problem was solved. End parentheses, to indicate the approximate time period remaining to us before Soviet science begins to bring the practical applications out of the field of parapsychology. So they're basically trying to say, we're looking at good scientists to see what they're working on who have proven success in other fields and how quickly we can sort of assert that Russia, which is now referred to as Russia, but then it was the Soviet bloc in terms of American media, how far or how quickly they may make advancements. In view of the recent Soviet emphasis on the new type of energy aspect of the field, it appears that this suggestion would be timely. As of 1972, between $13 and $20 million are reported to have been invested in the Soviet ESP research in 20 or more centers of research. That's fairly significant for 1972, I think, especially for people who are considered skeptics, right? The footnote's interesting here, too, number one. Lamoth, John D. It could be Lamothe, Lamoth. Controlled offensive behavior from the DIA. That's in January 72. That's the Defense Intelligence Agency. So again, we have reference to other intelligence gathering services within the government and defense services and things like that have already begun their own research. We have reference to that earlier than some of these documents. Soviet field research directed toward the isolation and investigation of PSI energy seems to have made some significant discoveries in 1969, in spite of some considerable opposition in Soviet official and scientific circles. One of the most intriguing developments during the year was the seminar of studies and experiments concerning the telekineticist Kalgune. I'm assuming that might be a media celebrity name. In parentheses, we have Nila Mikulova. A film of her capabilities has been made, viewed by Western observers, and portions of the film were copied from the screen and brought back to the U.S. The chief Soviet parapsychologist, Dr. Edward K. Numov, asserts that the powers of Miss Kulginia has been observed by Professor Terlexry, a well-known Soviet physicist who postulates some new kind of energy to explain this capability. This considerable interest in Kugenia capability seems to be somewhat related to the 1968 Soviet scientific interest in Ted Siros, who was able to produce a photograph using his mind energy alone of a Soviet rocket never before known to be available in Western communication or news media. The authenticity of the missile was vouched for by Professor Vikonya Anamov of something cut off, the word is cut off, State University, while he was an exchange professor at Nebraska University. I haven't seen any recent research about people being able to produce photography from their mind, using their mind. That's pretty thought-provoking right there. I also think the code word or the media name Kogenia is very similar to Kundalini, which that may be deliberate or may not. Excuse me. During the Kogenia experiments, a new device called a wireless EEG was used to detect some sort of energy pulsing around Kogenia while she was demonstrating the PK effect. Other reports indicate that these same rather sophisticated devices have been used to test clinically dead people. The ordinary EKG and EEGs register nothing. These detectors register some sort of energy. There's a slight bit of grammatical, it's not always me stumbling over the words here. I apologize. Dr. Abram Hoffer and Dr. Harold Kelm of the University of Saskatchewan are doing similar research with devices of a much similar design. So I actually think that's a Canadian center. So there again we have more confirmation of other organizations in other states doing their own research in universities. Western observers report that the best parapsychological work done in the Soviet bloc countries was being done in Bulgaria by Dr. George Iazanov. He has been in the field for over 30 years. Again, 30 years. If the report's 1969, we have 30 years of research behind that. That puts us back in the 1930s, which is what I had mentioned in, I think, Chapter 4, Part 1. He claims high-level support and possesses the only nationalized psychic in the world, Vanga, who is famous all over Eastern Europe and even in Russia. Lazanov is reported to have many institutes all over Bulgaria filled with costly Italian instruments and equipment. So if we have costly Italian instruments, we have Italians who know what they're building, or at least understand fundamentally what their inventions and equipment are being used for. So there we have again more confirmation of everyone else involved in it. He appears to have free access to Western parapsychological journals and has traveled through most of Western Europe and recently in India. To take a tangent, I recall in the 80s a lot of public access television and things like that, and even news, sort of going through two variations of presentation. One was a debunking presentation and one was a proof presentation, where you would see people appear on television and give demonstrations of their abilities, or at least in the least they would report, the agency or a journalist would report that someone's been able to do something. Excuse me. I don't know, I'm these days with what's circulating online and in the media and some of the things that we understand about how government law has been designed and regulated in such a way that it allows both our national media as well as international media to create propaganda on both sides of the fence without any sort of repercussions. And then also sort of on a lower level, albeit contemporary lexicon or just say awareness of people who do research and investigative journalism on their own. Many people are aware of what's called a PSYOP, which is a psychological operation, and it seems that those sort of run in multiple directions to either elucidate an information set or idea, or to obfuscate it and hide it and bury it or confuse it. So with an open mind. I don't think this document is fake. I don't think any of the research is fake. I do think that whatever research the individual listening to this may do on their own, you just have to be aware of that. And these documents in a previous chapter, I think in chapter 3 and chapter 4, have already addressed that they themselves are skeptical, and that skepticism stemmed from multiple different existing perceptions of the masses, as well as people within the community doing the research. And as we go through other chapters, you'll find that they've overcome that with various experimental methods. So this chapter is coming to an end here. This is Appendix A. I'm not going to read through the names at the risk of disrespecting some of these scientists, although Russian actually isn't as hard to pronounce if it's written in English. So Appendix A, we have a series of Russian professors, scientists, and doctors. And then Appendix B, it looks like we're looking at actual reports. But let's go back and look at Appendix A because I like the notes. Invention of a wireless EEG works in a military lab. All right, so there we have confirmation that the Russian military was working with it. Conceives time as a carrier of telepathic information. Right here. Of Leningrad laboratory describes the biological plasma on electrical aura. Well-known Soviet physicist has observed telekineticist Kalgunia and postulates some new form of energy to explain her feats. Well-known physicist works on serious photographic effect. Inventor of radiolocation in USSR, well-known specialist in the field of introscopy, also has a new energy concentrations theory to explain the serious effect. Let's bring all this forward to 2019, which is when this video is being recorded, and then look back a little bit 10, 20, 30 years ago in terms of what inventions have come up and how some of this stuff has been commercialized. So the biological plasma on electrical aura, this can be referenced as two things that are both contained within the CIA and NSA's research documents as Kirlian photography. You can look that up on Wikipedia. And also right now on retail websites that, big box large retailers like Amazon.com, you can actually go purchase a low-grade aura camera. And then we have, from a military perspective, we have goggles and binoculars and cameras on planes and things like that that allow them to capture what we're told is heat of human beings, from miles and miles away, thereby being able to identify a living subject, I guess, in darkness without light. I think it's okay to presume that most of that stuff has been advanced upon, and whatever is in circulation now, whatever is being used now, is much more accurate, more substantial, and most likely closely related to biochemistry, whereby they're able to analyze this plasma and this electrical current, EEG, and this conception of time as a carrier of telepathic information. Excuse me, pardon for the coughs. I've already had an early morning working and stuff, so this carrier of time, in my understanding and my interpretation, and just combining that with knowledge from more esoteric literature, religions, and occult literature, is light, is photons. Photons are the only thing that make time possible, in that if it exists under illumination, think of those photons as being able to carry that recorded information on. I think another way of describing that would be to use radio or television broadcasts, which before the digital television was rolled out almost within 4 months across the masses, I think in 2005 or 6 or 7, 2005, 2006, 2007. I mean, almost, without warning, the government mandated everybody had to update to a digital television. So to my point, starting that specific topic is, think about, let's just say a nation that's not connected to us, or an undiscovered nation, undiscovered island, fairly advanced, and they put a, they essentially just invent their own version of radio or a reception antenna, and they begin receiving transmissions, and they're not sure where they're coming from, and they're looking at our commercials, they're looking at our movies, they're receiving all this stuff that used to be widely available just using an antenna, or what was more commonly referred to as rabbit ears. Those transmissions don't disappear. The minute something was broadcast, it's in the air perpetually. So the use of digital TV eliminates that. So there's no longer going to be a record of those transmissions. You're not going to be able to sort it out or put your antenna up and take these transmissions. Apologize for the helicopters flying by. It's quite a constant distraction around here. I'm not sure if it's part of the geoengineering stuff or what's going on, but it's like a 15-minute interval around here, to the point where they vibrate they're so low they're vibrating the windows. But back to the radio stuff, consider those transmissions are perpetual, and that we hear these stories of NASA trying to pick up other signals from other places. And I think my example that I've just given here about, pretending there's a far-off land on our planet who have developed radio themselves, or a method of receiving transmissions and propagating them and translating them onto a screen. Whatever radio we broadcast for at least 80 years prior to digital, now being locked off of the airwaves, so to speak, because digital does not transmit in the air anymore. It transmits it along a line, thereby making it no longer available at a later date. Like if you wanted to watch an old TV show from the 30s or 40s, and it was being broadcast over radio or the spectrum, the public spectrum, you can put it up an antenna right now and still watch old shows from the 70s and 80s, depending on how good your receivers are. That is not possible anymore, and that's a way to sort of both eliminate the ability to go backwards in time, so to speak, and see what was said and done then. And it's also a way to compartmentalize knowledge sets in a way that doesn't allow people to make records of stuff anymore. So going back to conceives time as a carrier of telepathic information, and using, I think, the analogy in chapter 1 that I gave of the telescope of a person on a top of a building being able to, or a very tall skyscraper, being able to look at Chicago from New York, or vice versa. That telescope, with just a special type of polished lens and mirror, eliminates time. So it's not, you hear a lot of people say time is a construct and all that, and it's not even a construct. It doesn't exist at all. It doesn't exist at all. The only thing time is predicated on are the seasonal aspects of, or what's known as the sin cycle of the movement of the sun and the moon around the planet, over the planet. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. It's just a form of measurement from moment to moment, but it doesn't actually exist. It's not even a construct. That's not even true to begin with, because the telescope idea that I presented eliminates that, and all, you're not even using really anything electrical. You're just using light. A telescope where the sky is illuminated in New York all the way to Chicago. No clouds, right? No cloud cover, nothing like that. No mist or obfuscation from geoengineering mist or anything like that, or fog. And thereby time is eliminated with just nothing more than a couple polished lenses, which are highly advanced technology, sure, but they're not related to energy or electricity or anything like that. It's just photons. And I'm not trying to trivialize this. I don't mean to undermine any of the research that's done or to convince you of my idea over what's presented in these documents or research that you've done. I'm just trying to give an example of how to remove all the jargon and just understand this from a very basic premise. Inventor of radiolocation in USSR, well-known specialist field of hydroscopy, also has a new energy concentrations theory to explain the serious effect. Anyone who is familiar with Einstein's theory of relativity, Einstein is so often referenced both in a way to debunk things as well as further propagate new ideas. But before Einstein came up with his theory of relativity, we had a concept, and this concept was noted throughout occult literature or esoteric literature as well as scientific literature going back as far as the 1700s, and they referred to it as the aether or aether. And that idea was removed for some reason, or sort of maybe lost in translation, by springboarding the idea of physics and quantum mechanics. It could have been a way to try to engage people and get them to take on new ideas. I think that's often the case with some of the stuff that arises these days in terms of what's considered scientific inquiry, or an emerging type of scientific inquiry as it relates to a new phenomena. We often have to repackage it, or maybe we do repackage it so that the people who hold biases towards that knowledge aren't disposed to tear down a new paradigm or a new generation of people who are eager to solve those problems. So it has to be repackaged, not codified, but repackaged in a way that allows the younger generation or more interested people to take the helm, so to speak, of that information set and try to evolve it. But with that said, too, there's also clear obfuscation and codification that occurs where knowledge is being deliberately withheld or hidden, or in some cases it is broken apart and disseminated in such a way that someone is working on one thing and has no idea that it connects to another thing, or that there's a previous knowledge that has been written 10 years prior, or even 100, 200 years prior to that, that will help the existing people or existing researchers understand what they're working on more clearly. And that's sad, but we'll move on here. Let's not dwell on sadness. Physics exchange professor at Nebraska State University authenticates Soyuz photographs of Soviet bloc rocket. I'm not going to go and research that right now. I don't want to deter from this. I've already, with my tangential conversations and trying to inject some other correlating information in here, I know it can be a little bit confusing. Leading parapsychologist in Bulgaria and sponsor of Vanga Dimitrova, famous clairvoyant who is nationalized by the Bulgarian government and is well known in the Soviet bloc and even in the USSR. And psychologist and neuropsychologist, physiologist, a leading Czech PSI researcher and exponent of hypnotic method, good friend of Sergei V in Leningrad. When we look at where all this research came from and what countries who were told were poor countries in the 80s, again using the news as reference, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, 60s even, the Baltic states, the European Czech Republic and things like that. Here comes that helicopter. It's amazing how much war erupted in those territories, states, and countries right around the same time that this research was being done. I've stated in previous chapters, I think going back as far as chapter 1, that it looks to me that there's a religious contingent as well as a militaristic, or let's just say, I don't want to blame, I hate to use those names because it generalizes everybody and that might be involved in the military, or it overgeneralizes people that are involved with religion who just happen to be wonderful people, aside from the more militant aspects or the fundamentalist upstarts or usurpers within all of those groups. But it really seems to me that there was a group bent on hindering all of this, and that this research that was done by the CIA, the NSA, and the military was then weaponized in such a way that what it did is identified people who were capable, identified researchers, and identified inventions that existed, and on one level turn those inventions into weapons to hinder and suppress and neutralize and track people who were capable, and in others to confiscate it, and then through shock trauma of war theater, socio-political theater, really just make people focus elsewhere, and in turn really degrade and bury this information. It is interesting, even if you're not believing in ESP stuff or clairvoyance or telekinetics or anything like that. Just look at the notes in the appendix. Break away all that stuff, assign it to a year, the year of publication, and then look what happened in those countries during those years, or a couple years later. We know that witches being burned was a real thing. Men were burned who weren't witches. We know even today, through declassified documents of other government agencies, that people really do panic based on their own dispositions of knowledge, right? They create the fears, and then we have the psyops, which I mentioned before, where those psyops are designed to supplement those fears and further expound on those fears in a way that scales them up and tries to make them look real. So that's pretty scary stuff. There's so many correlations to make from this outside of just the ESP research and the parapsychology of it. So then, okay, we're on Appendix B. Description of filmed experiments with Nina. Again, another typo there. The U and the V. I swear, throughout all this research and even stuff going 500, 1,000 years ago, whatever, pick a date, there's always letters that have been switched out. And I'm actually going to present some graphics to take a break from this research intermittently, stuff that I've created myself, and show how some of those codes, or I shouldn't say codes, but I could even just say they're, whether you want to call them redactors notes or redactors codes or Intel codes, but how letters and numbers have been switched around through translations of very old documents all the way up to new documents, and how that, whether it was intentional or not, that typo was translated into something else, how it became something else. Soviet interest in Ted Senios, again, there's another typo there, claim to extrasensory perception qualities. And the reason why I call these typos is because depending on how the keyboard was, if these authors were using QWERTY style keyboards or QWERTY methods, the SENIOS here with the SY, the Y and the N are nowhere near each other. So that's a hard typo to make. So it's possible that multiple authors made the typo. One author made the same typos in different instances. Here we have the U and the V. It's interesting because they're not really closely connected. However, if we try to envision these people working on a telex machine or a typewriter or some of the old Xerox and Brother keyboards, it's possible that the people who were typing had very large fingers, were much taller or larger in general, or the keyboards were bigger and more laborious, and typos were, more prevalent at that time. All right, that's all for Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The next video is going to be on Chapter 5, testing for cryptological aspects of ESP. I think this one's going to be a little bit more interesting for people who don't really care about what's happened in the past or some of the commentary that I've made. However, I will be continuing on with the function of sort of overlaying my own thoughts as well as my own research and things like that on top of everything. But again, do your own research and take the time to sort through all this old stuff. I think it's great that there's a market and there are media leaders who have taken this stuff further and tried to market it. I shouldn't say it's great because not everybody's doing it in earnest or honestly, but I think it's great that the information is surviving in one way or another. However, you really should go back and look what comes before all that. It's been my interpretation, again, trying to meld contemporary with old. There's a lot of authors and media celebrities out here right now who, from what I can see, just basically stole information and commercialized it from the CIA and the NSA and the DOD and all that stuff. It's also very possible, and I think also happens often, is that people do arrive to the same ideas on their own, not recognizing that previous people have already come before them and done research very similar to it. So, if you're going to look forward, you got to be able to look backwards as well. And you should. We all should. There's always something new in the old. And I think that's an important lesson, even if you're not interested in any of the stuff. Whatever you're working on, whatever you're studying, whatever you believe in, whatever's sort of driving your research or investigation or business or, forward-thinking mentality, you also have to be able to go backwards and objectively sort through all of the stuff that other people have contributed, and never idolize one bit of information, or never give anybody your total authority to teach you something, when in most cases I think the honest leader of a I shouldn't say cult, but the honest leader of a information set will tell you to reference other things. They'll make you go somewhere else and look for more information unrelated or directly related. You have to. It's part of the discovery process. All right. Have a good day or good morning or good night.